Hi everyone, Hugs the Knee Kiss Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new TV on the radio record, Seeds. These guys are a fantastically talented New York indie rock outfit. They've been at it for years. Some of their best stuff dropped in the 2000s, and they put out another record in 2011, I believe, 9 Types of Light. Reviewed that. Not a favorite of mine in their discography. Certainly likable, good singles on this thing, some highlights in the deep cuts, but a lot of songs on this thing paled in comparison to others. Just some generally uninspiring songs, in my opinion, on this record. Not quite as electrifying as their 2 previous albums. A bit of a smoother album, if you will. And on this latest record of theirs, they seem to be undergoing yet another change. The music on this new record of theirs takes a kind of electronic direction. However, I will not be exploring my opinion and the music on this record by myself. In this particular review, I have invited Joel of the Daily Guru, a fellow music critic and music fan, music observer, to talk with me about this album. I will be changing my shirt and the screen as soon as I transition. Here we are, Anthony Fantano with Joel of the Daily Guru, and we are going to chop it up here about this new TV on the radio album Seeds via the magic of the internet. Yeah. Joel, what was your first impression of this album when QUARTZ came on? Opening track of this record.
The first thoughts. The very first second of this record, I said to myself, that is one of the most abrasively annoying album openers ever. Just the sound. It has nothing to do with the song. But just those opening notes, I was just like, what are you...
Are you talking about the synthesizers?
Just the barrage of noise that is the first 10 seconds of this record. Mm-hmm. I was very mad at it, and I said, wow, starting an album like that is kind of like... it's kind of like a kid throwing a temper tantrum just so you'll notice that he's there. And I felt like that's what they were trying to do. I thought it was an unnecessary opening and then went into a song that kind of had nothing to do with that opening.
It did, and it was a weird opening, but the song itself was pretty easygoing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It slides, and then the whole, a majority of the album is kind of more restrained, if you will. It's not as in your face until you get to a couple tracks on the second half that they're like, oh, we're going to plug in and rock for a bit.
Yeah. No, it's true. In comparison with their last record and their best stuff in the 2000s, this album is kind of toned down, which when I first started listening to it was sort of a huge turnoff. I don't know if it kind of made it hard for you on the first few listens.
I mean, that's not what was a turnoff for me. I didn't mind it. I said, okay, clearly they have a lot of reasons they're going to go in a slightly different direction. And if for no other reason than they're creative guys, I'm totally fine with it. And no, the fact that it was a different sound wasn't what turned me off initially. It was actually the sound itself that turned me off. I felt that, and let's just jump into possibly my biggest issue with the record. The vocals are way out in front of everything else to a point where I felt they almost dulled the rest of, everything they were doing under it, all the synth work, all the sampling, everything. You almost couldn't access it because the vocals were so in your face.
I think it's maybe more in your face for a TV on the radio record, and I think that's mostly because their instrumentation typically is pumped up a little bit more. And on these tracks, not quite as much, and we're getting a lot more synthesizers and electronic drums on these songs. And a lot of these songs melodically and structurally I do like, but sometimes these electronic sounds that they're bringing to the table instead, the song QUARTZ, the opener is an example, and the following track, Careful You as well. The choruses are so anemic. It's like when they switch from the verse to the chorus, the drums don't change or the synths don't really get any louder. It's like a lot of the time, with the exception of those harder rocking tracks toward the back end that you mentioned, the instrumentation is just so drab and just hanging in the background. And I mean, the vocals being up so front, I don't really mind as long as I like the tune. I like the song at the core of QUARTZ. But there are some tracks that it seems like the vocal melody in the song itself is just so dumbed down and so, like, insipid, I guess, for TV on the radio.
Yeah, I'm used to them having a really good overall balance. I think that's what it is. Whichever of those great kind of mid career, if you will, albums you want to look at, the balance is always there. You can spend a little time sonically with each instrument or the vocals. Nothing really overpowers it. I felt like everything just kind of blended together in like a giant pile of it just became noise to me. And the way that the tracks kind of flow into one another is usually a good thing to have that cohesive a flow where you can't tell where one track ends and the next begins. But in this one, it was like one really long, boring song.
I think, but as I listened deeper to the record, it didn't so much feel like that to me, not because it felt like all the songs were the same, but because there wasn't much about these tracks sort of like demanding my attention from the beginning to the end. I mean, I guess it sort of felt like a long, boring song in that, like, by the time the next song started, you had forgotten the previous one had been playing the whole time. At least that's how it was on my first listen. But, I mean, the next few tracks on here do make a change. I mean, Could You and one of the big singles from this thing, Happy Idiot, do feature more lively instrumentation, especially Happy Idiot. Although these tracks, to me, aren't really great song-wise. They kind of fix what the issue I'm having is with some of the more electronically driven tracks, but the song underneath this more lively rock instrumentation isn't really doing anything for me. I mean, Happy Idiot to me seems like something TV on the radio or even Block Party would have done better in the mid-2000s.
Yeah. What I kept writing down was, where are the hooks? Because there were things that were supposed to be hooks, but they didn't do it. They didn't actually, get me saying, oh, yeah, it's a really cool progression, or, like, singing along or taking interest in what they were doing. They were trying, but they just didn't work.
I agree, and I think it has mostly to do with the aesthetic of this record, and it just seems like they consciously tried to make a stiffer record. Like, they wanted to go in a more electronic direction. They wanted to pull the live instrumentation out of the equation. For what benefit, I don't know, and that's the thing. I haven't figured out the benefit of that yet, because the thing is, the electronics that they provide instead of this more lively instrumentation a lot of the time is just really, like, bland and really stereotypical for a lot of these indie acts that try to fuse electronics into their music in the 2000s and in the past 4 years as well, and the results weren't that great, like Rah Rah Riot or something like that, just like really middle of the road stuff. Was there anything positively or negatively about this album in terms of, like, a specific song that just, like, stuck out to you as, like, a highlight? Or
I think it was the second and third songs together that I was like, okay, I kind of dig those. And then I think it was it Winter, way at the end when they actually start turning things up. I think it was the track Winter, and they put that nice classic fuzz sound on the guitars, and I was like, okay, yeah, I like this more than what you were doing before. And they dig in for 2 tracks, but then they're like, okay, that was fun. Let's go back to what we really want to do. And if this is the direction they want to go in, that I have nothing to say there. I don't think it's a very smart idea if they want to have a successful career from here on out.
Yeah, I mean, Winter is definitely a part where they turn it up. I'm not in love with the song there, but I think the song LAZERRAY, right after that track, is so much better. It's like a really great, just clean-cut, sort of electronically tinged power pop tune. There are some other tracks that I think are really interesting. I liked the song Ride, which had, like, a lot of songs on here seem to function on this idea that, hey, we're going to come out with a really simple idea and kind of, like, progressively intensify it very subtly as the song moves along, as opposed to verse, explosion on the chorus, verse, another explosion there. And Ride is definitely one of those songs that I think did that positively. Like, instrumentally, it reminded me of tracks from, like, David Bowie's Heroes or Low, where you have these repetitive songs, and then by the end of the track, it just feels kind of massive. Yeah, I know, like, sort of an ambitious comparison there, but that's where, either in that or Krautrock is sort of where the root of that sits. Did they directly look at Bowie to do it? I don't know, but I thought that was at least one of the better executions. And then with the song Test Pilot, that track, I didn't really mind either. Some of the things that underwhelmed me on the back end of this record were a few of the ballads, because It just felt like with bringing the electronics into the fold, you didn't get the subtlety or the finesse that you would want in a ballad, you know? But to me, Test Pilot was one of the few moments where that ended up happening, where you had these like really sour, sharp, shrill, distorted chords placed together with the very mournful vocals. And I thought it kind of created a very desolate sort of soundscape, kind of like what Radiohead and Tom York have been doing lately with some of their stuff. Although there was something... This is another ridiculous comparison, but there was something about the vocal melody on that track that kind of reminded me of Lisa Loeb's Stay. Like, it just reminded me of some, like, sad, dreary 90s acoustic ballad or something. I can't explain it. I totally can't explain it. It was probably like just the flow of the da-da-da-da-da, you know, sort of the flow of the melody, the vocal melody, but just something about Stay. It just felt like these songs are like kindred spirits in some way.
I'll let you have your early '90s moment with that for whatever reason. You know, I think there is a mood here, and they get that mood, and that mood does stick the entire time. That kind of, like you said, desolate. Most of these tracks are pretty cold, and that's not a bad thing for me.
A lot of them feel love oriented.
What was that?
A lot of them feel romance, relationship oriented.
Yeah, and obviously there are strong undertones to this album, because Death in the Band, and obviously they're trying to figure out their new direction and everything, and that's why I give this album a bit of a break, because I think you do have a band in transition trying to figure out their new identity, and maybe this is just them stepping up to the plate, swinging, just saying, look, we want to get something out. We'll see where this sound ends up. As this, I'm hoping that this is more of a starting point of discovery, because this is a band I genuinely enjoy. And, overall, it was just like, I felt like at a lot of points they were saying, hey, look at what we just did. Where they're like, oh, did you see that, hear that cool sound we just made happen? And they were trying to force the issue a bit too much.
I suppose, it's not really for me that I think this is a bad direction, and I don't think it's that way for you either, but it just feels like at so many parts it could have been better. Just feels like it could have been more interesting, because, when the album isn't doing something interesting, it kind of feels like just a lesser than or an offshoot of another Indietronic act that's bringing guitars into the fold, or like some In Rainbow's era Radiohead. The only track on here that like struck me as being like irredeemably awful was Love Stained, which I don't know if that song stuck out to you as well.
Most of this album, actually, I hate to say it, most of this album actually fell into that category for me, irredeemably bad. It is a rare occasion that I have this much difficulty getting through a dozen spins of a record, just because I so much just did not enjoy it for really any extended period of time. There were, a minute here, a minute there, but I really had to endure this record. I did not like it at all.
Well, personally, I couldn't say it was that bad for me. I mean, a great deal of the songs here, I just felt like maybe the worst thing about them is that they would start off very minimally, and it would be a very simple sound, and it would seem decent for an introduction. But then as it went along and failed to introduce some newer or more interesting ideas, the bath would just get cold, Love Stained was a track I couldn't tolerate from beginning to end. It not only started off sounding like a track from the last Muse record, but then once the chorus kicked in, which is one of the few explosive choruses on the record, the drums, the synths, and the vocals don't even line up. Like, not even in terms of just the tempo, but it doesn't even feel like the vocals are on pitch with what's going on with the synthesizers. And the vocal melody is absolutely terrible. I have no idea what was going on with that track. It's just like a really ugly song. Like, there's no other way to look at it other than that. Like, it's just something to gawk at. Like, something kind of deformed, and you're like, oh my God, what is happening here?
Right.
But of the songs that I didn't like, I just kind of felt like that they would just fall into the background for me, not really stir up any negative emotions or anything like that, but just merely just fall to the wayside in my head.
Yeah, none of the tracks here really engaged me, like you said, but where it got frustrating for me is because since none of them did, I was like, I'd rather be listening to something else right now.
Yeah.
And because, you know, I try and find that silver lining in this cloud of turds. I'm just gonna hope that the fact that this album is called Seeds is just. I'm gonna go ahead and read a ton into the title of this album. That they're just saying, look, this is our new starting point. We are going to put these out there and water them in whatever metaphorical way you want, and they will grow into what the band is going to sound like in subsequent records. That this is what's in the dirt that they want to bury and wait for something better to come out of.
I'm going to hope for the same thing. Personally, I'm feeling a strong 5 to a light 6 on this thing. I don't know where you are.
I'm going to go ahead and give him I'm going to give him a 3 because I'm going to give him a point because I like the album cover.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give them a point because they play their instruments well.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give them a point because I think they're genuinely good people. So I'll give them a 3.
And there we are, Anthony Fantano and Joel of the Daily Guru. We just hashed it out on the new TV on the Radio album, Seeds. What did you think of this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And let me know. Also, head over to youtube.com/thedailyguru and check out Joel's channel as well. And we'll be talking about more albums in the future. Not sure when, but it'll be here. The question of where is no longer a question. It's right here. It's going to happen right here. All right? Cool. TV on the Radio, Seeds, forever.